Picture the devil. You already have the image. Red skin, horns, a pointed beard, a forked tail, cloven hooves, and a pitchfork. Possibly a cape. Now here's the thing, not one element of that picture comes from the Bible. Not one. There is no verse anywhere in the Old or New Testament that describes Satan as red, or horned, or hoofed, or carrying a three-pronged farming implement. That image is medieval and Renaissance European art, borrowing heavily from the Greek god Pan and from satyrs, who were the standard visual shorthand for lust and wildness and everything outside the city walls. The pitchfork is probably a garbled memory of a trident, or of the tools used by the tormentors in paintings of hell. It accumulated over centuries and then got fixed in place by artists. But that is only a warm-up because the picture is not the interesting problem. The interesting problem is the character. Because if you go back to the oldest layers of the Hebrew Bible and look for Satan, you will not find the enemy of God. You will not find a fallen angel, or a ruler of demons, or a tempter, or a rebel. What you will find is a functionary, a member of God's own court, employed by God, doing a specific job on God's instructions. And the word used for him is not a name at all. It is a job title. And in Hebrew, it usually comes with the definite article attached. Not Satan, the Satan. So this video is about a transformation that took something like 800 years. How a courtroom official in the service of God became the arch enemy of the universe. And I am going to show you one place where you can actually watch the change happen, in two versions of the same story, in two books of the same Bible. Let us start with the word. The Hebrew noun Satan means adversary, or accuser, or opponent. It is an ordinary word. It is used of human beings without any supernatural sense whatsoever. In the first book of Samuel, when the Philistine commanders are arguing about whether to let David fight alongside them, they worry that he might become a Satan to them in the battle. An adversary, a liability who turns on you. In the first book of Kings, God is described as raising up a Satan against Solomon, and the Satan in question is a man named Hadad the Edomite, a political opponent raised up by God as an instrument of judgment. There is even a passage in Numbers where the angel of the Lord stands in the road to block the prophet Balaam, and the text says the angel positioned himself as a Satan to him. So here the word is applied to an angel who is explicitly acting on God's behalf, obstructing someone God wants obstructed. That is the base layer, an adversary, a blocker, something in your way. Morally neutral and frequently on God's side. Now, in later texts, the word starts doing something more specific. It begins to look like a role within the divine court. The clearest example is the book of Job, and if you have only heard about Job secondhand, the opening will surprise you. Job opens with a scene in heaven. God is holding court, and the text says the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and the Satan came also among them. Note the article. The Hebrew is ha-Satan. The accuser. It is a position, the way you might say the prosecutor. And that small grammatical point is doing serious work because Hebrew does not attach the definite article to personal names. You would not write the David or the Moses. So the presence of that article is not a stylistic quirk. It is direct evidence that at the time this was written, the word was still functioning as a common noun describing a role and not yet as anybody's name. You can therefore date the transition, roughly, by watching for the moment the article disappears. And what does the accuser do? He does his job. God draws his attention to Job and praises him. And the accuser makes a professional observation, which is a genuinely sharp one. He says, in effect, of course he is faithful. Look at his circumstances. You have put a hedge around him and blessed everything he touches. Take it away and see what you get. That is not a rebellion. It is a hypothesis. He is testing whether Job's piety is genuine or merely well-purchased, which is exactly what a prosecutor is for. And then, crucially, he does not act on his own. He asks permission. God grants it with limits. The accuser operates strictly within the boundaries God sets. He turns up again in the book of Zechariah in another courtroom scene, standing to accuse the high priest Joshua, while the angel of the Lord acts for the defense. So in both of these, the Satan is a member of the heavenly bureaucracy. He is not God's enemy, he is God's prosecutor. He does not rule anywhere. He has no demons. He is not the source of evil. And in Job, the disasters are explicitly permitted by God, which is a theological problem the book itself is entirely aware of and does not try to hide. Now here is the passage I promised you, where you can watch the theology shift under your feet. In the second book of Samuel, chapter 24, there is a story about King David taking a census of Israel. This is presented as a sin, and it brings a plague on the country, and the text is completely explicit about who prompted it. It says the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he incited David against them, saying, "Go, count Israel and Judah." God does it. God incites David to commit the act and then punishes the nation for it. It is a hard passage, and it is meant to be. Now go to the first book of Chronicles, chapter 21. Same story, same census, same plague. Chronicles is a later work, retelling material found in Samuel and Kings, generally reckoned to have been composed after the exile. And in Chronicles, the opening line reads, "Satan stood up against Israel and incited David to number Israel." Same event, same wording for the action. Different actor. Somewhere between the writing of Samuel and the writing of Chronicles, somebody looked at a sentence in which God incites a king to sin and found it intolerable, and they solved it by moving the action to a different agent. That is the hinge, and I do not know a cleaner example anywhere in the Hebrew Bible of theology visibly developing, because we have both versions and we can lay them side by side. So what happened in between? The short answer is Persia. In 586 BCE, the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem and deported a large part of the Judean elite. Roughly 50 years later, the Persians under Cyrus defeated Babylon and permitted the exiles to return. And for the next 2 centuries, until Alexander, Judea was under Persian rule. The Persian imperial religion was Zoroastrianism, and Zoroastrianism is built on something that Israelite religion, in its older forms, simply does not have: a cosmic dualism. In the Zoroastrian scheme, there is Ahura Mazda, holy good, and there is Angra Mainyu, holy evil, and they are locked in a real conflict that runs through history and will be resolved at the end of time. Good and evil are not 2 aspects of one divine will. They are 2 opposed principles. Now, I want to be careful here because this is a place where confident overstatement is very common. The influence hypothesis is mainstream, and it is well supported, but the mechanism is not documented. There is no text describing a Judean scribe sitting down with a Persian priest. Scholars who work on both bodies of literature are rare. What we can observe is that after Judean contact with Persia, ideas appear in Jewish literature that were not there before, and that those ideas closely resemble Zoroastrian ones. That is a strong circumstantial case, not a proven chain of transmission. But look at what appears. The Dead Sea Scrolls from the community at Qumran are saturated with it. There is a document called the Community Rule, which sets out what scholars call a 2 spirits theology, teaching that God created a spirit of light and a spirit of darkness, and that all human conduct falls under one or the other. It says the angel of darkness leads the children of righteousness astray, and that all their sin and iniquity is caused by his dominion. The scrolls have a name for this figure: Belial. And in another document, the War Scroll, there is a final battle between the sons of light, led by the archangel Michael, and the sons of darkness, led by Belial. That is a fully formed cosmic adversary with an army opposing an army of God, heading toward a final confrontation. It is a very long way from a prosecutor asking permission in Job. And we saw last time where else this is happening. In 1st Enoch, you get Shemihaza and Asael leading rebel angels. In the Book of Jubilees, you get a figure called Mastema, described as the chief of spirits, who is closer to the accuser of Job, but with considerably more independence and menace. So, across the Second Temple period, a range of Jewish texts are all converging on the same thing: a leader of evil spirits, a single chief adversary. He goes by different names in different documents, which tells you the idea was forming faster than the terminology could settle. There is one more piece of machinery that gets built in this period, and it answers a question people rarely think to ask. Where did demons come from? Because the Hebrew Bible has very little in the way of demonology. There are a couple of obscure figures, some goat demons haunting ruins, a scapegoat sent to something called Azazel in the wilderness, and not much else. There is certainly no organized population of evil spirits afflicting people, which is what you find everywhere in the Gospels. First, Enoch supplies the origin, and it is grim and entirely logical within its own terms. Remember the giants, the offspring of the Watchers and human women. Enoch, chapter 15, deals with what happens when those giants are killed, and it says that because they were born of both heaven and earth, their bodies die, but their spirits do not. Those spirits have no home. They cannot go up because they are half earthly. They have no bodies to return to. So they remain on the earth and they afflict the living. Demons, in this account, are the ghosts of the dead giants. That is a piece of theological engineering of real elegance. It explains why demons exist, why they are hostile, why they want bodies, and why they are here rather than somewhere else. And it is not in the Bible. It is in Enoch, and it is the background assumption behind a great deal of the exorcism material in the Gospels. And that is the world the earliest Christians came out of. By the time you get to the New Testament, the picture has hardened considerably. Satan there is a proper name, not a job title. He is called the ruler of demons. He tempts Jesus in the wilderness. He enters Judas. He is described as the ruler of this world, and in one of Paul's letters as the god of this age. He is the enemy. The Greek word used alongside Satan is diabolos, which is a straight translation of the Hebrew, meaning slanderer or accuser, and which gives us the English words diabolical and devil. But notice something, even in the New Testament, the developed backstory that Christians take for granted is not actually laid out anywhere. There is no passage narrating a rebellion in heaven before creation. Revelation chapter 12 has a war in heaven, with Michael defeating a great dragon which the text identifies as the ancient serpent, called the devil and Satan, but that is a vision of the end times, and reading it as a prequel is an interpretive choice, not a plain reading. Which brings us to Lucifer, and this one is a genuine mistranslation. In the book of Isaiah chapter 14 there is a taunt song, and it is not addressed to a supernatural being. The chapter tells you explicitly, a few verses earlier, that this is a taunt against the king of Babylon. The poem mocks him for his arrogance and says, "How you have fallen from heaven, O shining one, son of the dawn." The Hebrew is Hillel ben Shachar, which is imagery of the morning star, the planet Venus, which rises brilliantly just before dawn and is then immediately extinguished by the sunrise. It is a beautiful and rather cruel image for a king whose glory was brief. When Jerome translated the Bible into Latin, he rendered Hillel with the ordinary Latin word for the morning star, Lucifer, light-bringer. And over the following centuries, readers who already believed in a great fallen angel encountered a passage about a shining one falling from heaven and attached the two together. A Latin common noun describing a planet became a proper name for the devil. The same thing happened to the serpent in Eden. Read Genesis chapter 3 and you will find that the serpent is never identified as Satan or as an angel or as anything other than a serpent, described as the most cunning of the animals God had made. The identification comes much later, and once it was made it became invisible, so that most people now read Satan into that chapter without noticing they are supplying him. And then the last stage is not scripture at all. It is literature and art. Dante put him at the center of hell, frozen in ice, enormous and weeping. Medieval mystery plays gave him a comic and terrifying stage presence. And Milton, in Paradise Lost, gave him something no biblical text had ever given him: interiority, motive, some of the best speeches in the poem. Milton's Satan is proud, wounded, articulate, and magnificent, and he is so compelling that readers have argued for 300 years about whether Milton meant him to be. An enormous amount of what people believe about the devil comes from a 17th century English poem. It is worth a short detour to see what happened to the same figure in Islam, because the contrast is sharp, and it clarifies what the Christian version is actually doing. In the Qumran, the adversary is Iblis, also called Al-Shaitan, and his fall has a specific cause that is narrated directly, which is exactly what the Christian tradition lacks. God creates Adam and commands the angels to bow to him. They all do. Iblis refuses, and he gives a reason. He says he is better than Adam because he was created from fire and Adam was created from clay. So the sin is pride, and specifically a refusal to honor a creature he considers beneath him. It is a coherent, motivated rebellion, stated in the text. There is a further difference that Muslim commentators discuss at length. The Quran in one place describes Iblis as being of the jinn, a category of created beings made of smokeless fire, who, unlike angels, possess free will. Which resolves a problem the Christian tradition has always struggled with, namely how a being created good and without sinful inclination manages to rebel at all, and his function afterwards is narrower. Iblis is granted respite until the day of judgment and permission to tempt, but he has no power to compel. In one passage, he is depicted addressing the damned after judgment and pointing out that he had no authority over them, that he merely made a suggestion and they came. He is a whisperer, not a ruler. There is no realm he governs and no army he commands. So, two traditions working with overlapping materials produced quite different adversaries. One is an accuser who became an enemy through centuries of accumulation. The other is a proud refuser whose motive is stated on the page. So let us put the whole sequence together, because when you see it in order, it is remarkable. He begins as an ordinary Hebrew word for an opponent, applied to human beings and to angels doing God's work. He becomes a title, the accuser, a prosecutor in the divine court operating entirely under God's authority. During and after the Persian period, in an environment shaped by contact with a genuinely dualistic religion, he acquires independence and an army and a war. In the literature of the Second Temple period, he gains names and a rebellion. In the New Testament, he is the enemy of God and the ruler of this world. A mistranslated Latin word for a planet gives him a proper name. Medieval artists give him the horns and the hooves, and an English poet gives him a personality. Satan was not revealed. He was assembled over roughly 8 centuries by people trying to solve a genuine and very painful problem. And it is worth saying what that problem was because it was not idle. If God is good and God is in control, then where does evil come from? The book of Job stares directly at that question and refuses to give a tidy answer. The developed figure of Satan is, among other things, an attempt at a tidier one. Move the evil off God's desk and onto somebody else's. Whether that solves the problem or simply relocates it is a question theologians have been arguing about ever since, and I am not going to settle it in the last minute of a video. But there is one more piece of the machinery to account for, because a devil needs somewhere to put people. And if you go back to the Hebrew Bible and ask where the wicked go when they die, you get an answer that surprises almost everyone. They go to exactly the same place as everybody else. There is no hell in the Torah, not as a place of punishment, not for anyone, not ever. The good and the wicked go down to the same silent dust, and the texts say so plainly and repeatedly. So somebody invented it, and we can say fairly precisely when and why and what historical catastrophe made it necessary. That is the next one.